What if Betty Boo was Wu-Tang Clan affiliated? This week I'll be taking a look at the varied and fascinating musical career of Alison Clarkson, better known as Betty Boo, and also celebrating the majesty of Wu-Tang Clan, hip-hop's greatest ever collective. All this and more on this week's What If, How, When, Why. Hi, my name is Morgan Brown, and every Monday I upload a new What If video to my YouTube channel, and then on Wednesday I do one of these companion videos discussing the artists and genres involved, as well as sharing some insight into my process. So the idea behind my What If videos is that each week I pick a popular song and imagine an alternative universe in which some change of circumstances causes that song to come out completely different from the version we know and love. I then take the original lead vocal of that song and record a new backing track to it using just GarageBand and whatever instruments I happen to have to hand in order to bring that alternative version of the song to life. So the song I picked this week was Doin The Do by Betty Boo, and I tried to reimagine that in the approximate style of the Wu-Tang Clan. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that yet, here's a little taster.
You think that I'm a pet, 'cause I'm the best you could ever get. I never make the teachers pet, and ease yourself. I know you despise me, you criticize and override me, but I'm better and a whole lot cleverer. A go-getter, you know, a trendsetter. I'm all the rage, I know the craze. Come on, change the record, gotta turn the page. Betty Boo, Betty Boo, just doing the do, and you are through, and there's nothing you can do. Betty Boo, just doing the do, and you are through, and there's nothing you can do. I'm sorry if I upset ya. To get the better of me, I will let ya.
Now, as a kid, I was pretty slow to catch on to hip-hop. I was definitely initially much more drawn to music with guitars and didn't have much of a clue about rap music for a little while there. I think eventually through the Anthrax collaboration, I got into Public Enemy, and then from there discovered all kinds of other great hip-hop music and found my way into it that way. I think that was around 1991. Before that, although I'd hear odd rap songs and kind of think, oh, you know, it's okay, I didn't really know much about it. It wasn't something I was particularly engaged with. One exception to that was Betty Boo, whose music, against all common sense, I did very much enjoy. Something about the combination between this kind of slightly snotty, smart alecky rap with these super catchy, hooky pop choruses performed by this girl in this crazy retro futurist science fiction gear that to 10 or 11-year-old me was extremely appealing. And yeah, I very much enjoyed those early 90s Betty Boo singles. Obviously, once I eventually discovered Public Enemy and then Cypress Hill and Ice-T and whoever else, I would have probably then looked back at Betty Boo and thought to myself, oh dear, well, you know, that's not proper rap music. What I wouldn't have known at the time was that actually Betty Boo had some pretty legit background in hip-hop. I only discovered all this years and years later, but prior to her solo work and her records with the Beatmasters, Betty Boo was a member of this group, the She-Rockers, who not only toured in the US with Public Enemy, but also recorded with Professor Griff from Public Enemy producing. So, I mean, you can't get a much more legit hip-hop background than that. Going on tour with a heavyweight hip-hop group like Public Enemy, who at the time were such a source of controversy in the States, I mean, that's a pretty daunting prospect for anyone, I'd imagine, and for a group of British teenage girls must have been absolutely mind-blowing. Apparently it was the urging of Chuck D from Public Enemy that helped to convince Betty to go solo as well. So after splitting from the She-Rockers, she then collaborated with the Beatmasters on Hey DJ, I Can't Dance to the Music You're Playing. She kind of helped establish the direction that her subsequent solo records would go in, taking her signature rap style and her singing style and combining it with this more high energy pop house sound, which was certainly more of a chart friendly proposition in the UK music scene at the time. So she follows that up with her own records, Doin The Do and Where Are You Baby. They're just great pop records. They're so fun. As I say, brimming with attitude, but quite tongue-in-cheek, quite deliberately kitschy, this retro futurist image, and just excellent pop music. And that first LP, Boo Mania, was rightly a tremendous success. Sadly, the follow-up, Grr, It's Betty Boo, didn't achieve the same level of success. There was at least one decent-sized hit single from that in the UK, but I guess maybe people had seen Betty Boo as a little bit of a novelty. I suppose that's always the risk of having such a kind of quirky and unique image, is that people can see you that way. So in the couple of years it took to produce a follow-up record, people had moved on. So sadly that record didn't do as well, and I think in the aftermath of that and being let go by a label, Madonna did actually approach her to try and get her to sign to Maverick Records, but from what I've read, by this point Betty, or Alison's mum, was very, very ill with cancer, so she decided to withdraw from the spotlight to go and look after her mum, which obviously is very sad but completely understandable. And then nothing much was heard from her sort of publicly for quite some time after that, but she was doing some really interesting work behind the scenes. You start to see Alison Clarkson popping up as a songwriting credit on a bunch of different artists' songs over the next couple of decades. The most notable one that I always remember being Pure and Simple by Hearsay, the group that won the original Pop Stars TV show, which, you know, might not be the most fondly remembered pop song these days, but it's a pretty big deal writing this #1 single that came out of this massively popular TV show. That was kind of cool, and you'd see her cropping up with other odd little projects at various points. One that I found really intriguing, and then it sadly didn't really go anywhere, was Wigwam, which is a project that her, the members of the Beatmasters, and Alex James from Blur put together. I think they initially planned to do an album, but it ended up just being this one self-titled single, which is this really kind of fun, slightly weird glam pop song. Quite unusual for the time it came out, and quite different to anything else that she'd done as well. I always thought it was a bit of a shame that there was never anything more from that project. But yeah, in recent years, we've very happily seen her return as Betty Boo. She's been releasing new music, she's been touring again, and I'm very happy to say that she still sounds exactly like Betty Boo. There's been refreshingly little attempts to do anything more self-consciously mature. It's still the sound that you want if you're a fan of those early records, so that's really cool. And I foolishly missed the opportunity to go and see her playing in Birkenhead when she toured just last year, so I've been kicking myself ever since, so I'm definitely going to try and make sure I catch her next time round. An underrated gem of the British music scene, and one that we should cherish while she's still out there doing it. But yeah, as I say, although my interest in hip-hop may have largely started with the likes of Betty Boo, I did get into some more serious hip-hop fairly soon afterwards. As I say, starting with Public Enemy, then working my way around to, I guess, initially other hip-hop acts who had associated with metal bands. So Ice-T and Cypress Hill particularly were very early discoveries for me. I also got really into De La Soul, just because by that point I'd got into a bunch of 60s and 70s rock, and so I was hearing those samples in their music and was really fascinated by the way they'd taken those and turned it into this whole other thing. So by the time I was in my early to mid-teens, I was into a bunch of this stuff. It took me a little while longer to actually discover the Wu-Tang Clan. Somehow they totally passed me by for a good many years. I don't think it was really until way towards the end of the 90s or even about 2000 that I think I was just reading an article about them in the NME or something, and was just completely fascinated by the idea of this gigantic group with, you know, 9 members, and they all had these incredibly cool names. I mean, a group with a guy called Ghostface Killer. I thought, this sounds cool. Why have I not heard of this before? Belatedly went back and hunted out a copy of Enter the Wu-Tang, their debut album, and that absolutely exploded my brain. It's just such a wonderful sounding record, so grimy. Everything just sounds like it's got this layer of grit on it. Just these really raw drum machine rhythms, these crackly, grimy soul and jazz samples, interspersed with all these little bursts of crazy 1970s kung fu and samurai movie soundtracks, and then just overlaid by 9 of the most astonishing MCs you've ever heard, all of whom have really distinctive styles, but who complement each other tremendously well. But yeah, totally gripping stuff, like just audio cinema. So I was an instant convert, really. And even if they'd only ever made that one album, they'd still be absolutely on the Mount Rushmore of all-time great hip-hop acts. But there's so much other good stuff too. I don't know the other albums that have ever been quite as acclaimed, but I mean, the follow-up Wu-Tang Forever is a monumental piece of work still. I think it gets a lot of flack because the production's different. I guess in between those first 2 albums, there's big changes in sampling law, so Riz has completely revised his approach to production in between, so there's a lot less of the gritty sample-based stuff, and everything's a bit grander and more polished and more arranged. which lends the whole thing a bit more of a kind of epic tone, a bit less sort of street level. But there's some astonishing stuff on there. The W, again, is an absolutely great album that somehow manages to restore some of that early grit to the group's sound. Again, just another really dark, brooding, menacing sounding record. It's awesome. And even Iron Flag, the follow-up to that, it gets a lot of stick. I think it's not broadly considered to be among their best work, but there's some astonishing stuff on it still. And while all this is going on, because you've got so many members, everyone's also releasing solo records, and a lot of those solo records, particularly the early ones, end up having so many of the collective guesting on them that they're essentially more Wu-Tang records, just with more of an emphasis on a particular member. So things like Raekwon's Only Built for Cuban Links, astonishing, Ghostface Killer with Iron Man and Supreme Clientele, and Jizz's Liquid Swords. Just this ever-expanding universe of Wu-Tang Clan music. And I really don't think you can rate them highly enough, to be honest. Between the full band albums and then the spin-offs and everyone's individual solo work, it's such an absolutely staggering body of brilliant work that I don't know if there's anything in hip-hop that comes close, really. And they've definitely had their ups and their downs. I know with any kind of group like that, it's always going to be a nightmare trying to hold the whole thing together. And there have been many spells where they're at each other's throats, disputes over money, people suing each other, and obviously they overcome tragedy as well with the loss of Old Dirty Bastard. And yet somehow they've more or less managed to make it through as a unit. And currently, I think, actually just embarking on what's apparently going to be their farewell tour. I know they're coming to Manchester next month. I would absolutely love to go. Unfortunately, I do not have any money, so I will not be going. But if you are able to get out to that last tour, I hope you have a great time. But yeah, anyway, that takes me to this week's alternative universe scenario. So in my alternate timeline this week, it's late 1993. So we find Betty Boo at a bit of a crossroads in her life. Gurrett's Betty Boo has been released and sadly hasn't done anywhere near as well as either she or her record label have hoped. So she's parted company with her label and she's not sure what to do next. She's received an offer of a contract from Madonna, but she's not too sure that's the way to go, and she's considering just taking a step back. Just as she's on the cusp of finally committing to that decision, she receives a new offer, and this one comes from Razor Sharp Records, which is a label run by the RZA from Wu-Tang, whose debut album has just absolutely blown up in the hip-hop world in the last couple of months. So she's really intrigued by this, and it turns out RZA remembers her from way back when she was touring with the She-Rockers. He saw them with Public Enemy, has been impressed, and has been following her career since, saw that she'd lost her record deal and is reaching out to try and bring her in, and she can't resist such a great offer, so hops on the plane over to New York, meets up with the guys and gets to work recording. RZA's got a bunch of young Wu-Tang affiliated producers who he wants to get working with her, so they get going on this, cut this album. The lead single from it is a reworking of Doin The Do. No longer is it a fun kind of kitschy pop house track, it's now got this grimy kind of blaxploitation funk feel to it. Edgy and dark new version of Betty Boo. So that's the debut single from the album that unveils this new version of Betty Boo to the world. Unfortunately, it doesn't really pay off because obviously her old fans who are expecting more fun pop rap are alienated by this new dark, slightly scary direction, whereas the hardcore hip-hop heads refuse to take her seriously, even with Wu-Tang's backing. So sadly, the record isn't a success, and Alison Clarkson decides to hang up the Betty Boo persona, withdraw from the public eye, and goes on to be a very successful songwriter behind the scenes. But in the meantime, this Wu-Tang style version of Doin The Do gradually becomes a cult favourite amongst hardcore hip-hop fans. So yeah, in order to try and convert Doin The Do from this fun, kitschy early 90s pop rap thing into a somewhat more Wu-Tang style serious hip-hop song, my first step as ever was just getting the original vocal into GarageBand and syncing it up with the grid. Having done that, I set to work on the backing. Now, I decided that in sort of relatively authentic hip-hop style, I did want to try and make up the majority of the backing from samples, either genuine samples taken from real media or made up pretend samples that I concoct myself. So for the main body of the backing, I decided to create a fake jazz funk soul kind of sample that could loop round underneath the track. You hear in Wu-Tang quite a lot of these sultry 70s soul samples just looping in the background there, so I wanted something like that. So made myself a little kind of 4-bar section of music for which I recorded some electric piano, just playing a couple of chords. There's a bit of guitar on there with a wah pedal. There's double bass, just GarageBand instrument double bass, playing a funky little kind of groove there in the background, and then a drum kit playing a fairly simple kind of in the pocket groove as well. Added a little bit of vinyl crackle as well, and mixed that all down into a single block that I could then loop round and use as the basis for the track. To bolster the rhythm that's on there and to make that section sound like it had been sampled from an actual record, I EQ'd it in quite a sort of trebly and middly sort of way. I took out quite a lot of the bass frequencies, so although you can still hear the bass and drums on that, they're pretty tinny. It's more focused on the keyboards, the guitar and the strings. To bolster the rhythm then, I added a drum machine loop. I found just a nice gritty sounding drum machine. I programmed in a beat, and I also bolstered the bass frequencies by just adding another little couple of bar section of bass guitar, but with practically no treble at all, just a really kind of booming, subby kind of bassy tone to it. So that's just there as well, just adding loads of bottom end. Those elements form the main basis of the track, just dropping odd bits in and out just to change things up as we go through. I thought for a Wu-Tang style song, I really needed to have some samples from martial arts movies, because that's kind of a bit of a mainstay of their whole sound. So hopped onto YouTube, found a little kind of 2-minute scene from The 5 Deadly Venoms, which I know is a bit of an old RZA favourite. So just ripped the audio from that, and then from that, I got a bunch of different samples that I use at various points in the track, both speech samples with that great sort of dubbed dialogue and sound effects. So I've got sort of things like punching sounds, which I drop in occasionally to use as sort of additional percussion, double in the snare and various bits to give it more impact. And also bits of the incidental music I've used, so there's little string drones and also this crashing little piano figure, which I used as a bit of a hook for the chorus. Just pitch shifted it into key. And another thing that I wanted to get in there to give it a bit more of a Wu-Tang-y sort of feel was you do hear a lot of cool like little jazz samples in a bunch of those records, so I wanted to have something that suggested that jazzy feel as well. Had a bit of a delve through my CD collection and came up with Folk Forms by Charles Mingus, which, as luck would have it, is pretty much exactly in tempo and also in the same key as Doin The Do, so I didn't have to do very much with those samples at all. Basically dropped the whole track into GarageBand and then just selected little snippets of it to use as samples. So I've got an Eric Dolphy sax riff that loops round at various points, which I thought was pretty cool. Got a high trumpet note that comes in the chorus, just as a little kind of stab, which I thought sounded the part as well. And there's also just a little section with some drums and bass, which it's pretty backgroundy, but it crops up in a couple of places, just adding a bit more texture to the thing and filling out the sound a bit more. So once I'd got all those on and decided where they were all going to go, I thought it was pretty much done, but there was still just something missing, and I decided that the one remaining thing that we needed was just a little bit of piano. One of the things that I hear quite often on those early Wu-Tang records is just these little piano figures. Sometimes they're samples, but sometimes I think it's just RZA playing stuff in himself, particularly thinking of the one in Cream. So decided to come up with something a little bit like that myself, so just played in a little slightly jazzy piano figure, and that was the icing on the cake, I thought.
Now he's here as well, but where?
And then for the video, as ever, started out by just getting some performance footage from back in the day and syncing that up to the track. There's a good Top of the Pops performance, which I used as the basis for this. And then I wanted to have some Wu-Tang presence in there, so found some cool footage from way back in the day of someone visiting them in their headquarters to interview them. So you've just got a bunch of various Wu-Tang members popping up to say hi at various points in there. And then to give more of that kind of street level feel that we're looking for, found some really cool drive around footage of Staten Island back in the 90s. Proper Wu-Tang Shaolin territory, so chopped that up and edited that in there too. That kind of sets the scene that we're trying to conjure with the track as well. So I hope you enjoyed this one. Anyone who's familiar with my channel will know that I'm definitely much more of a rock guy. Hip-hop's absolutely not my speciality, although I do love it. So I was a little bit nervous delving into things like this, and I'm worried that I'm going to make a mess of everything and offend people who are more serious hip-hop fans than myself. But I gave it my best shot, and I always really enjoy just trying my hand at these things. It's a whole different way of putting a song together. To my ears, it came out okay, so hopefully you'll think so too. Either way, do let me know what you think down in the comments, and if you did enjoy it, please like, share, subscribe, all that stuff really helps. If there's anything you'd like me to do in coming weeks and months, any songs or artists or genres you'd like me to investigate, do let me know. Your suggestions are always valued. But otherwise, that's all from me for this week, so thanks very much indeed for watching, and I'll hope to see you next time.